We are to our new city of Pergamum. So we're going to be looking at this. This is probably my second favorite place of all the places we traveled to. So what we've looked at so far is Ephesus and Smyrna. Now we're up here in Pergamum. And it looks like it's quite a ways off the coast, which it is a little bit. But what we're going to be looking at tonight was, it was in a location up on a mountain that it could be seen from the sea. And so as we look at this, you'll understand. The city of Pergamum is located in what is now the modern day Bergama, is what the city in Turkey is called, and the ancient ruins of the Acropolis. And you see that high hill, that is the Acropolis. That's where the majority of what we're going to be looking at tonight is located, and this is one of the most incredible sights in all of Turkey. It is phenomenal. The architectural genius is obvious to anyone who sees this site. This is up on what is known as the Acropolis, looking back down on the modern day city. That modern day city was built over the original city of Pergamum. The Acropolis is the area that would hold a lot of temples, a lot of government buildings, banks would have been up here on the hill, a library, a lot of those kinds of things, just a lot of the city buildings that they wanted to protect. And you know that this must have been one of the most spectacular cities to see in ancient times. We can see the ruins now, and it's still pretty amazing, but you can only imagine what it may have been like back in ancient days. Pergamum began to become an important fortress city after the reign of Alexander the Great. And so it became the center of what for a while was the Attalid Empire. When Alexander the Great died, he turned his empire over to his 4 generals. And the Attalid Empire was a part of one of those portions of the Greek Empire at that time. But it was usually called, this entire Attalid Empire, a lot of times was actually called the Kingdom of Pergamum. And that just kind of reveals how important this city was. And so the very last Attalid emperor, he gave the city of Pergamum over to Rome when he knew that Asia was going to be absorbed into the Roman Empire. And so to get up to this site, which is like I said, on this high mountain, there is a road there that goes snakes its way up this mountain, but the easiest way is to go by cable car, and so that's the way most people do it, and is quite the ride. But the Caesar Augustus, who was the very first Roman Caesar emperor, he declared Pergamum his capital in the province of Asia. Every emperor, Rome was always Rome. Rome was always the center of the Roman Empire. But each emperor, a lot of times, they would declare another city their capital, most important city. And Pergamum was Caesar Augustus, which made it even more important of a city, because the very first emperor, and he's declared this city to be his capital city. It just increased the influence of this city. And so atop the Acropolis of the city of Pergamum was the temple that was built to Caesar Augustus. And this temple was massive. It was impressive. And as I said, it's sitting on top of what is called the Acropolis. The Acropolis, it's two words together. Akron means summit, polis, like metropolis. Polis is for a city, and so a city up on a hill, city on a mountain. A lot of cities in ancient times had an acropolis. They would build a city next to a very high mountain, and they would build fortresses and all kinds of things up on those high places. This temple to Augustus, Caesar Augustus, not very many times will you find other emperors use another emperor's temple for himself. They will always build one of their own. But that was not the case with this one. There were 2 or 3 other emperors that declared this their temple. And so the last one that we know of was Trajan. Kind of gives a little bit of an illustration of what this might have looked like when it was completely, when it was all there. But the temple to Caesar, it had an altar that doubled as a throne. And this was really common among the Greek temples, having the altar in the image of a throne. It symbolizes rule, it symbolized authority, and the authority of that emperor or that god, because they believed that the emperors were gods. They have uncovered ancient hymns that were written on tablets that were to be sung in worship to the emperors as divine beings. And so they had worship services where they sang hymns to the Roman emperors. So Pergamum became the center of the imperial cult worship very, very early on in Asia Minor. And this is, of course, depicted in the book of Revelation. This is, in chapter 13, the beast that comes up out of the sea. As we see in the book of Revelation, represents this imperial cult worship that was taking place, and a big part of the persecution of Christians at that time. But because this was the capital of Caesar Augustus, Pergamum was given what was known as potesti gladi. And what that meant was the power of the sword. And the power of the sword, the Romans, they used a double-edged sword as a symbol of imperial power. So if a city was given the power of the sword, then that meant that they had the ability to make decisions with the same authority as if it was given by Caesar himself. So the city officials here, if they made a ruling, it was just as authoritative as if it was Caesar himself. That's just the status of the city, with it being that capital city of Caesar Augustus. It led to all of this. Well, this was not the only throne residing on Pergamum's Acropolis. In the late 1800s, a German engineer by the name of Karl Humann, he saw some locals. And what they were doing was they were taking these marble stones, fragments of marble stones, and they were burning them. And if you understand the process of that, they were burning them to get lime so that they could use it in other building projects. And so this Karl Humann, he was an engineer, and he sees them doing this. He asks them, "Where are you getting all of these marble stones?" And they point up to the Acropolis, and there's this huge pile of just rubble. And so when he gets up to this pile, where that tree is, kind of in the center, top up there, that's where the pile of rubble originally was. You can still see there's a foundation that's still a part of a structure that those trees have been growing on for quite some time now. But this engineer began to excavate by getting permission from the Turkish, or at that time the Ottoman emperor, and he uncovered a massive altar that they discovered was to the Greek god Zeus. And in 1886, he had the entire altar. There's just another view of that, looking down on it. But he had the entire altar transported to Berlin. This is what they believe it may have looked like. Well, they know pretty much what it would have looked like, because almost all of this altar, almost all of the pieces were still there. And when they transported it to Berlin, they put it back together. And so you can go today still, and you can see the altar of Zeus from Pergamum in a museum in Berlin, Germany. And when they reconstructed it, it took on an eerie look as though it was a massive throne. And so the altar of Zeus was also something that represented a throne. In Pergamum, this altar sat just a couple 100 feet away from the temple to Caesar. So I tried to mark those so you can kind of see. There is the temple of Caesar there to the left, the altar of Zeus. It's actually, you can't tell in the picture, it's down quite a ways, a level quite a ways to get down to the altar of Zeus, but it was not too far away from it. And originally, the altar of Zeus was completely covered in gold leaf. And that this throne, this altar, sat some 44 feet tall. So you go back and imagine that completely covered in gold leaf. It would have been an incredible sight at the time. Here's a depiction of what they believe that whole area probably would have looked like based on all of the archaeological finds that they have had at the time. And so just incredible what the construction, architecture, and everything would have been like at that time. They made sacrifices on this altar of Zeus 24 hours a day, every single day. It never stopped. There was a fire that continued to burn that never went out, that they continued to make sacrifices on. It was not a temple, it was an altar. It was a place of sacrifice. So this was not a temple to Zeus, but it was an altar that was built to worship Zeus. So I think I got a video that I took to kind of just show you the area. Just to the left is the temple of Zeus, or the altar of Zeus. Kind of just show you the landscape and everything too. It's beautiful over there. And this is looking up onto the platform where the temple of Caesar would have been. You just kind of get an idea of the landscape around there. Well, Pergamum also held the second largest library in the ancient world. Alexandria in Africa was the biggest one. We already saw the third biggest one in Ephesus, and then this was the second. There's not a lot left to it, but this was the location of the library of Pergamum, which was world known in ancient times. There was a gymnasium, there were Roman bath complexes, there were dozens of temples to various gods that all were on this Acropolis area. Pergamum also happened to be the capital of Dionysius. Dionysius was the Greco-Roman god of wine and orgy. And this was really the god of the city. They had the altar to Zeus, but this was the God that everybody came to Pergamum to worship. The temple of Dionysius, it served as a starting point of what is known as the Sacred Way. And I've tried to mark, this is a long way down the hill where the temple of Dionysius is, but that where I highlighted in yellow is what is the beginning of a road that was called the Sacred Way. It was a street that ran through a portion of the Acropolis and then wound its way down the mountain toward the city. This temple is what led to the construction of the tallest theater in the ancient world, which is still an acoustic marvel to this day. It's almost unbelievable for somebody to stand down in the bottom, this is standing at the top of the theater, to stand there down at the bottom and speak in a normal voice, and you'd be able to hear them like they're just a few feet away from you. It is incredible, just the engineering behind what they were able to do back then. This is the steepest theater that was ever built in ancient times, and the tallest. They're fairly limited on how wide they could go with it, so instead they decided we'll just go up. And even though the mountain was very steep, they just built into it. And I believe it was a total of 122 feet from the platform, where the orchestra or the stage area, to the top seats. And this theater would have seated about 10,000 people. If you remember, we've used the size of a theater to determine the size of the city. And so usually they said that the theater would seat about 10% of the city. So 10,000 people, Pergamum would have been about 100,000 in population, at least at one point. Now the Sacred Way, and I highlighted it again, so that's the temple of Dionysius. That's down there just at the bottom of the theater. There's a reason for that. But the Sacred Way, it weaves its way down the Acropolis. It passes by 17 other temples to major Greco-Roman gods. And only Athens in Greece rivaled Pergamum with its importance and prominence of its temples to gods. And so Pergamum was the home of the annual festival of the god Dionysius. And this festival involved the eating of raw meat, drinking incredible amounts of wine, and indulgence in rampant sexual immorality. That was how you worshiped Dionysius. And there was actually a law that forbid women to marry in Pergamum unless she had lost her virginity in a Dionysian festival. That's the immorality. That's the paganism. That's what we're talking about. So this was not just another one of those pagan places. This was the seat of the worst pagan sexual immorality and idolatry that existed. This was worse than the city of Rome. This was worse than the city of Athens. It ran rampant and unchecked in Pergamum. Now, the temple of Dionysius, you can see it again there to the left at the bottom of the theater. And then the Sacred Way that runs there as well. The Sacred Way literally runs right across the stage of the theater. And this was on purpose. They built it this way intentionally because this stage, when you came to the Dionysian festival, everything started right here. So the theater was actually built intentionally and specifically for this festival. And they would have begun with plays and musicals that started right here at the temple, and when you would follow the Sacred Way down the Acropolis, you'd follow it on down and you would participate in other festival activities as you walked the Sacred Way. This is the temple of Dionysius, looking down on it from the back. And you can see the altar at the very top, right here. That was the altar. During the festival, this altar would have been completely covered, piled high with hundreds of pounds of raw meat. And you would indulge yourself by taking the raw meat and gorging on the raw meat, eating the raw meat. Then you make your way on down the sacred way. As you go down the sacred way, and a lot of this, I'm showing you a lot of this just because it's there, and you learn a lot about Pergamum by seeing all of this and the paganism. But I'm also specifically pointing out things that when we read the text from Revelation about Pergamum, that hopefully you'll be able to catch a lot of the things that are in the text that have everything to do with what's going on in the city of Pergamum. So this right here, this is what I refer to as a debauchery house that is along the sacred way. This is a kind of a picture looking at it. It's a 3-level building, and the first floor, you can barely see them, but they have uncovered wine vats, a few different ones in this lower floor. So when you would have walked in off of the sacred way, you would have been greeted with just all kinds of wine. And you would have got your wine to drink. This is looking down from the second back down onto there, so you see again the wine vats that were discovered. And you also notice there's the sacred way walking that goes right along in front of this place. And so on the second floor, this is what is called the vomitorium, which that word in Greek, it's used a lot of different ways. The exit out of a building or the exit out of a theater was called a vomitorium because it was people were exiting out of the whatever building or structure it was. So that's where the word came from. But the archaeologists, when they discovered this and discovered what was actually here, they named it a vomitorium. You go up from there, well, this is that same on that second floor as well. Go up from there to the third floor, and this is where the party was held. So you had your raw meat, you had your wine, you make your way up to this top floor, and these two platforms that are there are what are known as tricliniums. Tricliniums are tables that you would actually recline on top of. And so those two platforms, and it's kind of hard, the picture doesn't get it all, but they're kind of U-shaped. Both of them are U-shaped. And so they would lay on these tables, and then this platform here on the front is where their wine and their food and anything else that was served to them would have been placed while they were taking part in the festivities there. And when you get drunk and you have eaten a lot of raw meat, what is almost certain to happen? You're going to throw it all up, which is why there was the second floor called the vomitorium. That's what that floor was for. Doesn't this sound like a fun way to worship a god? So, this entire building was built for the purpose of worshiping Dionysius. And there were dozens of these along the sacred way. So this is the pagan culture that you're dealing with, that our first century brothers and sisters were surrounded with, and which many of them had been a part of themselves their whole life. They didn't know there was anything wrong with it. It was their life. It was their culture. It's how they were raised. And so when we talk about the Gentiles coming out of these things and into Christianity, I don't know that we really understand how hard that really was. And the change, how drastic it was, or what they were doing to be Christians. So we have the throne of Caesar, we have the throne of Zeus, we have the throne of Dionysius, which all come with deeply embedded pagan idolatry and immorality, but we're still not done. Because Pergamum was also home to the largest Asclepion in the ancient world. So an Asclepion, when I say Asclepion, you say hospital. That's what an Asclepion was. In the ancient world, the Asclepion in Pergamum would have been like the Mayo Clinic of the ancient world. It was the biggest, it was the most advanced, it had the best doctors, the best psychiatrists, the best soothsayers, the best priests, the best everything that was involved at a medical treatment center. A lot of cities had Asclepions, but no one had one like Pergamum. The only one that came close was in the city of Corinth. And when we talk about Corinth, I will show you some of the stuff from the Asclepion in Corinth. But this was not just a hospital, it was built as a place to worship Asclepios. Asclepios is the god of healing. You notice he has a staff, has a snake that is wrapped around that staff. Still today in the medical world, what do we see when we look at the staff that has the snakes that are wrapped around it? We still use the same emblems that came from Asclepion. So here is the sacred way. We've come down the mountain. We're at the bottom of the mountain now, and the sacred way is going to end at this Asclepion. There's an aerial view, kind of able to see it a little bit better. Now along the way there to the left and about the middle, you see kind of a circle along the side. This was a sacred fountain. It was a pool where you would be ritually purified before you would enter the Asclepion, or the Asclepion. And when you entered, you would enter into this large courtyard where there was an incense altar that was sitting in the center, and you see it sitting right here. And so before you entered into the Asclepion itself, you would offer incense to the god Asclepion. So here's something that we don't really think about when it comes to Christians in Pergamum. Were Christians even able to use the hospital? If they were sick, if they were ill, would a Christian even be able to go in and get medical treatment? Because you were required to offer incense to the god Asclepion before you were able to go in. A lot of things that we don't think about. Normal everyday life stuff that their faith in Christ completely changed for them. Notice the emblems again there. There's the snakes and there's a shield. Still today, Blue Cross Blue shield. That emblem is still used in medical things today. So there's this large area then of the Asclepios. And there would have been a library here where you could read and study about your illness and your diagnosis. There was a small theater that was they would have enacted out the myth or the story of the god of Asclepion. There were mud baths to aid in your healing and recovery. To get to a doctor, you actually entered into this tunnel that went underground. It only went down one level, but this is where you actually went into the Asclepion itself. This was the diagnostic center. It's built, this tunnel though was built specifically with acoustic purposes because there was a trough that ran along a part of the side of this that had water running through it, and the sound was amplified in the tunnel to sound like a lot of rushing water, which was supposedly the voice of Asclepius, supposedly. If you think in Revelation chapter 1 and verse 15, one of the descriptions that's given to Jesus says his feet were like burnished bronze when it has been made to glow in a furnace, and his voice was like the sounds of many waters. The more you learn about the pagan culture and the world these people lived in, the more you begin to see the images that are used for Jesus and for God that connect with what they believed about their gods. And there's comparisons that are being made. And so once you were in the diagnostic center, there were dozens of these small rooms, probably with beds. You go in, not a whole lot different than our hospitals today. Go in and wait for a doctor to come in, or be given a hallucinogen, and then you would have priests come in and interpret the dreams that you had, and that would go along with diagnosing what was wrong with you and how to be healed with whatever was wrong with you. Once you were done, you would go and tell the priests about how you had been healed, and they would inscribe your name on and your ailment and the story of your cure on a big white stone. So all throughout the Asclepian in Pergamum, you see these white stones that have the names and the conditions of people who were healed. All of this, before we end, let's read the text then, Revelation 2, about Pergamum, the letter to the church in Pergamum. And to the angel of the church in Pergamum write, the one who has the sharp two-edged sword says this: I know where you dwell, where Satan's throne is, and you hold fast my name, and did not deny my faith, even in the days of Antipas, my witness, my faithful one, who was killed among you, where Satan dwells. But I have a few things against you, because you have there some who hold the teaching of Balaam, who kept teaching Balak to put a stumbling block before the sons of Israel, to eat things sacrificed to idols, and to commit acts of immorality. So you also have some who in the same way hold the teaching of the Nicolaitans. Therefore repent, or else I am coming to you quickly, and I will make war against them with the sword of my mouth. He who has an ear, let him hear what the Spirit says to the churches. To him who overcomes, to him I will give some of the hidden manna, and I will give him a white stone, and a new name written on the stone, which no one knows but he who receives it. All of those little things were intentionally meant for the people of Pergamum. They knew what those things represented. The sword, the two-edged sword. Pergamum was a potesti gladi city, a city with the power of the sword, the authority that came from the emperor. Well, here's a statement being made. This is the authority that comes from the mouth of Christ. Satan's throne. We're not sure exactly what is being referred to, but there's a lot of thrones in Pergamum, and the altar of Zeus is one that looked like a massive throne. And so very likely that could have been what it was referring to. Eating things sacrificed to idols and committing acts of adultery connected with the festival of Dionysius. That's exactly what it was. The white stone used in the Asclepian to record the names of people who had been healed. These all had symbols to what these people would have thought of when they heard it. But what Jesus is doing in writing these letters is connecting all of this back to what I will do for you, not what these false gods are said to do for you. This letter also mentions one person, mentions Antipas, who was a Christian in Pergamum who was killed for his faith. Early Christian tradition claims that Antipas, his prayers drove out demons and interrupted pagan rituals. I wonder what pagan rituals he was interrupting. Probably had a lot to do with the festival of Dionysius. And I try to picture this leader in the church in Pergamum disrupting something like that. And the hatred that would have given him. But history says that the pagan priests took Antipas before the city authorities, and they demanded that he burn incense to the emperor. He refused, so they put him in a large metal cauldron and set him on the altar of Zeus. And they burned him alive in the cauldron on the altar of Zeus. That's what our brothers and sisters were dealing with. And we think we've got it bad. And even our culture, we think our culture's bad. We're still not there yet. We're moving that direction, but we were still not there. But it gives us a little bit more of an idea of just what our brothers and sisters in Christ were dealing with. When we read in Scripture about the challenges and the struggles that these Gentiles had, we get a little bit better picture of this is where they're coming from. And Pergamum is one of the biggest contrast between Christianity and that pagan world that we see. All right.